It was the highest diminished value settlement ever paid out in the state of Georgia. So I started supercar rentals while I was a student at Georgia Tech in 2006, and the first car we got was a Lamborghini Gallardo, and the second car was a Ferrari 360, which I quickly traded, in fact, for a Ferrari 612 Scaglietti because I had a particular customer who lived overseas and he wanted a car to consistently use in the US, and that was the car that he really wanted. And so his interest and demand and use of the car justified adding a car that was a little bit atypical as a rental car. It was a gorgeous car. It was painted Bordeaux Ponte Vecchio with a Maserati Cuyo interior, which was slightly different than the Cuyo Scaglioni does for the Ferraris. And so we found the car down in Fort Lauderdale, and I went down to get it, and the car was spectacular, extremely comfortable. In fact, on that drive from Palm Beach or from Fort Lauderdale south to Miami on 95, I remember we were cruising along, probably going 100, 110. My wife was with me, and I saw the strangest speed trap I've ever come across. There was a maroon or sort of dark red Impala, and it was jacked up in the corner on the side of the road. I noticed that there was a uniformed police officer next to the car, and we were, going considerably over the speed limit, and I watched him quickly drop it off the jack, jump in, fire it up, and turn some lights on. And I was like, goodness gracious, I didn't see him with a radar gun, but maybe he was just going to estimate my speed or something. But certainly he was interested in finding me, or perhaps it could have been someone else around me. Who could say for sure? But I decided that sustaining that speed or actually increasing it a little bit as he was accelerating from a stop might be a better solution. Got a couple exits down, exited, and told my wife that we probably ought to grab something to drink at a local convenience store. So we pulled off the highway, waited there for about 15 or 20 minutes, and never met him again. He worked in the oil and gas industry, and so he had a conference in Texas. So I shipped the car out there, and he was driving it for a week or two. And I got up one morning, and I had missed 6 phone calls from him, and had a few text messages asking to call urgently. And so that was only a few hours before, so I called him, and he explained to me that he had been driving it late one night and someone had run a red light and T-boned him. And he wasn't confident in their insurance. So we began an insurance claim through the uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage of our policy. And that all went rather well, but unfortunately, this was in 2007. The car was a 2005, and there simply weren't a lot of 612 parts available. This is a common problem with exotic cars when they're just released. Obviously, all the resources are going into building the new cars that are in high demand as fast as possible, and so it takes a long time to get parts. And it used to be a risk that if cars could not be repaired within 6 months, there were some insurance policies that forced that the cars be totaled. So I remember seeing a lot of early Ferrari 355s that had extremely minor bumper damage, but would end up becoming salvaged because they couldn't get the parts in time. And so the insurance companies would end up having to buy them, and then they just repair and sell them. But obviously the value hit due to the branded title was not insignificant. But all the parts kind of trickled in, and everything eventually went well. The car had been hit on the driver's door, but the damage was mostly cosmetic, mostly to the door and the fender. The color match was perfect. The body shop did remarkable work you'd never have known. But the problem with any Ferrari that's been damaged or has, a sordid past of some kind is that the demand in the pre-owned market drops drastically. And so years ago, State Farm Insurance lost a class action lawsuit that stipulated that just fixing your car in the event of an accident was in fact not enough to justify that they've made you whole. And in addition to that, they needed to offer some coverage for diminished value. And that diminution of value comes because if I'm offered one Ferrari that has a perfect service history, is in excellent shape, but then another one that also has been serviced, is in good shape, but it was in an accident a few years prior, I'll want to pay less for that car. It's a clear logic, and it makes all the sense in the world. But the problem comes in how you decide what that is. And so diminished value is generally in the first moment calculated based on an equation that was born out of that State Farm lawsuit. And so even though they weren't my insurer, that equation becomes applied to pretty much any other car. So in Georgia and in most states, there are some that do not have diminished value coverage, and there are also insurance policies that strictly say that you are not given diminished value in the event of an accident. Most dealership insurance policies are this way. So when I crashed that Aventador, we never got any diminished value money, even though the insurance paid to repair a car, and technically the car was less valuable after the accident. We were in this situation where we had paid for a fairly new Ferrari, a lot of money, and now it most certainly wasn't worth anything close to that. And so we began the process of negotiating diminished value. So the first offer, I think, was $8,000 to say that this car that at the time was probably worth 200 grand was only worth $8,000 less, having been in an accident that was a pretty expensive repair. I think the repair bill came to be about $120,000 because it's the prerogative of the body shop to stipulate that repairs of panels are unacceptable on a car like this. So even on a situation like the wheel that's back there, a little scrape, they ordered a replacement. So they had replaced, I think, the door, the fender, and the quarter on the car, and the paint and the labor and everything came to become very expensive. But the biggest problem was actually the door panel. And I guess for 612s in the early generations, there were 5 different door panel designs of some sort. And so with the Daytona seats this car had, the stitching pattern and the colors and everything, it took like 10 or 11 months to get the door panel. So we ended up driving the car around a little bit without a door panel because it didn't really make that big of a difference, and we knew it was coming. But the diminished value was not based on the car being inadequately repaired or not driving well or having any less utility value. It was simply the fact that given the alternative, people didn't want to buy it. And so we went back and forth a little bit, but the saving grace of the entire equation was that Magnum had referred me to a diminished value appraiser. And so generally insurance clauses stipulate an arbitration clause in the event of a dispute. It means you're not going to sue us in court. We are going to find a mediator or an arbitrator. And in each state, there's generally not that many who do this. And they represent insurance companies as well as they advocate for the consumer who is seeking more money. So you'll see a lot of ads if you ever Google diminished value. There are firms popping up all the time. But this guy that I was referred to, and unfortunately he has since passed, and the number he came up with us having been offered $8,000, was $50,000. And that was much more appealing to me, obviously, because I knew when the time came, this was going to be a difficult car to sell. But I was concerned, like even meeting in the middle, 25 might not be enough. But he told me not to worry. He said he's done this a lot and things tend to end up as he'd like them to. So, as we would say, the advocates for the insurance company were shrewd negotiators. And so they met right smack dab in the middle at about $48,600. It was the highest diminished value settlement ever paid out in the state of Georgia at that time. It was beaten about maybe 6 or 12 months later when an employee of a Ford dealership drove the boss's Ford GT through a fence, and the entire thing had to be essentially rebodied from the damage. But somehow it didn't total it, so they did get diminished value. If your car gets totaled, you won't. But it was the biggest diminished value settlement in the state of Georgia, beaten then by the Ford GT, which I think got $53,000. And then we were both beat handily when a truck transporting Michael Fuchs's Bugatti Veyron rolled over, and the car had to be shipped back to the factory in Molsheim to be repaired. I don't know what the number was, but I know it vastly exceeded ours. That's also a big reason why we created VINwiki. We wanted to give people a way to document what actually happened in the circumstance of an accident. If you have a very small accident, but it's part of an insurance claim, it's going to show up on Carfax and AutoCheck and other vehicle history reporting platforms. But that doesn't really matter. I mean, if you look at a dealership and see a car with a painted front bumper or a rear bumper, nobody really cares. But there's plenty of cars that have bad Carfaxes because of minor paint work like that. And we'd like to give people a platform to put that information on a historical timeline of the car to explain what had happened. Because people assume, well, why would I ever want to post anything bad to VINwiki? Well, there are different ranges of how bad something might be. And certainly the accident on the 612 was pretty significant, but I've had plenty of cars where the damage wasn't really that bad. For instance, when the guy, the week of my wedding, had stolen the 612 and crashed the Gallardo, the damage was $30,000. It was a repair to the front bumper and a respray of the front of the car, and the diminished value there was legitimately about $8,000. It wasn't that massive. It wasn't a hugely significant repair, and that's what we collected from his insurance company. So use this, use VINwiki, tell your car's story, keep track of your records, and when you go to sell your car, even if it does have something in its past that you need to overcome, the more information you have, the better.
If you like that story, it's time to make one of your own. Extreme Experience puts you in the driver's seat of some of the world's best supercars at over 20 racetracks from coast to coast, with no speed limits, no shifting restrictions, and no governors. Head to the link to choose your supercar, find a racetrack near you, and start making a story of your own. Extreme Experience. It's your turn.